What's the deal with narcissistic people putting their kids in therapy?
Let's talk about narcissism. Now, we're not talking about clinical diagnostics here. We're talking about the general understanding of people identifying other people who have high levels of narcissistic attributes. But with that, what is narcissism and why would a narcissist do certain things? To understand why a narcissist might send a family member to therapy, and I've seen it happen a lot in the kinds of crisis work and various kinds of victims advocacy I've done, when a narcissist sends somebody to a therapist to fix them or get medication, this is part of the projection process of how a narcissist feeds their continued self-defense delusion. So narcissists, deep down, and they will not even admit this to themselves a lot of times, are extremely afraid. They are exceedingly afraid of the world. They're afraid of judgment. They're afraid of other people laughing at them. They are afraid and vulnerable, and they are afraid and believe that people are persecuting them. There's always a very high level of defensiveness to any perceived slight. So they're noticing it even when there's not one intended. They're noticing slights more easily. They're believing people are doing this intentionally. And if the individual is more Machiavellian, like they play social games really well, they may engage in abusive behavior as preemptive strikes to try and get ahead of somebody who's going to screw them over. And so if you have more elevated Machiavellian traits and narcissism, there tends to be more of a conscious effort to get ahead of this persecution that they perceive is going to happen. And yet all of this is protecting this very, very soft, very, very afraid part of themselves and creating this bubble of and facade of perfection. And so if you are having to be perfect, you can't actually be in relationship with other people because relationship requires accountability, and accountability requires you to not be perfect and admit that you're not perfect and try to fix the things and work with another person on being in relationship. So narcissists sort of do the surface level maintenance of what a relationship looks like, but they're not actually doing the work of a relationship. They're not actually in relationship with people a lot of times. They tend to have two types of people that they surround themselves with. People who also have elevated narcissism or are narcissists, because those people are all wanting to show their value and they play the game with each other, that they are all valuable, they're all high value, they're all doing these things that are so great and so wonderful, and they all lie to themselves and to one another about how great and wonderful they are. The other type of person a narcissist usually has around them is people who are very highly empathetic and understanding and more compassionate and willing to do what the narcissist wants as a means of helping them control their environment. So typically people who are acting as emotional regulation tools for the narcissist. And those people very often become their family members, usually a narcissist and their partner. The partner usually is far more empathetic and ends up in a kind of codependent relationship where they are acting as the emotional regulation for the narcissist. And so with that, in that family unit, typically then there's a child, and like everybody, there's hardships that happen in life. But the narcissist cannot engage in admitting that they are wrong because that's part of their deep driven kind of self-defense mechanism. And so they're not taking accountability for anything. So if things are going wrong, whose fault is it? Not theirs. So they have to project onto other people that bad things are happening because of somebody else. And often because children have less power in the family dynamic, and sometimes because the narcissist remembers that everything was fine before the children were born, it must be the child that's at fault. It must be the child that's broken. And they view therapists as fix-it tools to make the child the way they want. That this child will go to therapy or get on medication and then everything will be okay again. Now, what'll happen is if you have a competent therapist, the therapist goes, oh, sure, I'll work with this kid. And they try to balance the idea of I'm going to help this kid actually develop themselves and be healthy psychologically and learn how to set boundaries. But the therapist has to set boundaries with the parents more often than not. And so the therapist sets boundaries. The narcissist does not like that because they're not getting out of this what they think they would, which is controlling the situation and getting the child to do what they want, because that control allows them to feel safe again. It allows that delusion to continue, that they are in charge, that they are important, that they are doing the things that make life make sense for them again, that they are safe. And then the therapist pushes back against them. They don't like that, so they're going to get rid of that therapist and look for another one, and look for another one, and look for another one, until they find a therapist that is going to reinforce or give the diagnosis or give the medication or engage in the way that they want. And many of them will also go into these religious environments that are also tend to bring in a lot of high-level narcissists, narcissistic pastors, narcissistic consistories or councils of those churches. And a lot of those churches have different kinds of counseling centers that are maybe not even professionally regulated, therapists or anything like that, but they have counseling centers that push a specific narrative that very often holds the same kind of high control environment that a narcissist would wish for. And so they will put their family members into those because those therapists are not even therapists typically, or they are willing to uphold that kind of dominant paradigm of controlling the behavior of the child and saying, they're the ones at fault, and not holding accountable the narcissist in these situations. So this is typically what happens. The narcissist cannot take accountability for what is going on with them because that is part of their self-defense mechanism of delusion that they are grand and perfect and wonderful. And so anything that challenges that has to be met with some kind of force, sometimes preemptively because of that feeling of persecution. And then they have to control the environment to make themselves feel safe again. And that typically can mean trying to force therapist after therapist to get a family member to be diagnosed or medicated or something else because they think this will be the solution to make them feel safe again, at least for a little while. But it never lasts, and that's why there's usually this cycle of it's good for a while and then it goes through another cycle of, because something else will always go wrong because it's life, right? And they cannot admit and they cannot take accountability and they can't be in genuine relationship with anyone else because of this bubble of perfection. Means that they can't ever actually take accountability and grow and move forward or interplay with a family therapist in a way that would allow them to really move forward without significant work on that defense mechanism that is so overblown that they really can't connect to anyone genuinely.